Faisal Al-Rahman and Layla Al-Harbi were supposed to be the perfect couple. He, a wealthy Saudi businessman with power and influence, and she, a radiant young bride from a respected family. But what began as the most glamorous wedding of the year ended in horror on their very first night together, when hidden secrets from Layla's past ignited a storm of rage that would turn celebration into tragedy. The city of Jeddah was alive with celebration as one of the most anticipated weddings of the year took place. Guests arrived in black-tinted cars, stepping out dressed in the finest designer clothing. The hotel ballroom shimmered under crystal chandeliers, their golden glow bouncing off tables decorated with imported flowers flown in just for the night. At the center of it all stood the groom, a man whose wealth was whispered about across the region. He was not only successful in business, but also came from a lineage that commanded respect. His name carried weight, his influence stretched far beyond the city, and his fortune ensured he could have anything he desired. On this night, what he desired most was finally his. His bride entered the room to the sound of traditional drums and soft violins. She wore an intricate gown embroidered with pearls, her veil cascading down like a river of silk. Cameras captured every moment as if the world itself had paused to witness their union. Friends of the bride admired her grace, while the groom's associates quietly praised his choice, noting how she seemed the perfect match, young, beautiful, and born into a family of good standing. Every detail of the wedding was carefully curated to reflect power, prestige, and perfection. To the outside world, it looked like a love story woven out of luxury. The couple smiled for photographs, exchanged symbolic glances, and greeted guests as if nothing could break their happiness. The setting, the music, the lavish feast, it all spoke of a future that promised stability and admiration. For the hundreds of guests seated beneath the glowing chandeliers, there was no reason to believe that beneath the layers of silk and gold, shadows were already forming. This was the night the storybook began. Before the grand engagement, the bride's life was much different from the one she now displayed to the world. She was young, restless, and curious about what lay beyond the confines of her environment. In late nights alone with her phone, she wandered into online spaces where she could be anyone she wanted to be. Dating platforms became her escape, places where she could chat freely without the weight of her family's expectations pressing down on her. She posted carefully chosen pictures, sometimes playful, sometimes alluring, and attracted the attention of strangers from different countries. For her, it was a private world that felt distant from reality, a secret she never believed would matter in the future. Over time, she deleted many of these profiles, fearing discovery and quietly convincing herself that it was just a phase of youth she had outgrown. Yet the internet rarely forgets. A handful of her images were saved by those she had spoken to, and fragments of her conversations lingered in forgotten corners of servers and screenshots. She moved on with her life, polishing her public image and stepping seamlessly into the role of a respectable bride-to-be. To her, the past was buried. To everyone else, it was invisible. But secrets have a way of resurfacing. While she prepared for a wedding that symbolized purity and tradition, faint trails of her digital past remained active. A comment here, an old account there, and whispers exchanged in private groups hinted at a history she would rather erase. She believed no one would look closely, that the glow of wealth and celebration would blind any suspicion. What she did not realize was that her secret world was not as hidden as she thought, and eyes were already searching for cracks in her perfect facade. The groom had always been a man who valued control, not just in business, but in every part of his life. His fortune had been built on precision, on knowing every detail before making a move. When the anonymous tip reached him, it landed like a stone in still water, disrupting the calm he had carefully constructed. The message was brief, almost cryptic, but it carried a warning that his bride-to-be had lived a life far from the flawless image she now displayed. At first, he dismissed it as nothing more than jealousy or envy from someone threatened by his power. Yet the thought refused to leave his mind. In the days that followed, unease grew inside him. Every smile from his bride, every compliment about her elegance, began to feel like a performance. He started noticing small inconsistencies in her stories, moments of hesitation when he asked simple questions. Though there was no evidence before him, doubt had already planted its roots. Pride and reputation mattered more to him than love. The idea that his future wife might carry a stain from her past became unbearable. Determined to uncover the truth, he turned to a private investigator, someone discreet and trustworthy. The task was clear: search her digital history, find out if there was anything that could embarrass him, and report back quietly. The investigation took only weeks, but the results were devastating. Screenshots of dating profiles, archived conversations, and photographs surfaced like ghosts from a hidden world. To the groom, this was not youthful curiosity, it was betrayal. From that moment, his view of her shifted. What had seemed like a perfect union now felt like a trap designed to humiliate him. Rage began to eclipse reason, and what should have been the happiest time of his life transformed into a storm of suspicion and obsession. The wedding day ended in a spectacle of fireworks, music, and blessings. Guests left the ballroom with smiles, their arms heavy with gifts and their minds filled with admiration for the union they had just witnessed. To everyone watching, it had been flawless, a ceremony drenched in wealth, tradition, and elegance. Yet when the final song faded and the last guest departed, the couple was left alone in their lavish hotel suite overlooking the Red Sea. The golden glow of the city lights outside contrasted sharply with the silence that settled between them inside. What should have been a night of tenderness was instead weighted with unspoken tension. The groom carried with him the evidence he had collected, images and messages he could not erase from his mind. His pride, wounded by the thought of deception, turned the room into a battleground of silent fury. The bride, unaware of how much he knew, tried to step into her role as a new wife, but the atmosphere quickly shifted. For the groom, every glance at her face became a reminder of the secrets he had unearthed. Hours passed, and the silence gave way to anger. The confrontation escalated, his obsession with purity and reputation colliding with her attempts to defend herself. No words could soften his growing rage. The luxury of the room, the expensive decor, and the promise of a future together faded into insignificance as violence took over. By dawn, the celebration had turned into tragedy. The bride lay lifeless in the very place that was meant to mark the beginning of her new life. The groom stood over her, his hands stained not with love, but with destruction. Outside, the world still believed in a perfect wedding, but inside those walls, the fairy tale had ended in blood. Panic set in the moment the groom realized what he had done. The weight of his actions pressed against him, not only for the life he had taken, but for the shame that would follow if the truth surfaced. Reputation was everything, and scandal could destroy not just him, but his entire family. In his world, appearances mattered more than reality, and he knew he had only hours to decide how the story would be told. Quickly, he devised a plan to turn the tragedy into something others could accept without suspicion. He picked up the phone and alerted the hotel staff, his voice controlled yet urgent. He claimed his bride had suffered a sudden collapse, perhaps a medical emergency. By the time doctors rushed into the suite, her body was beyond saving. Staff members noted the panic in his voice, but also the way his eyes avoided theirs, as if rehearsing a version of events he needed them to believe. The scene was swiftly taken over by his family, who arrived almost immediately after hearing the news. Their influence ensured questions were minimized and explanations accepted without challenge. The official story spread quickly. The young bride had died suddenly of natural causes, a tragedy no one could have foreseen. Arrangements for a quiet burial began almost at once, shrouding the event in dignity rather than scandal. Yet not everyone was convinced. Some who had seen the body whispered about unusual marks and inconsistencies in the groom's account. Hotel workers exchanged uneasy glances, sensing that something darker had occurred in the luxurious suite. Still, the family's power was overwhelming. With wealth and influence, they silenced doubts and shaped the narrative. To the world outside, the tragedy was a cruel twist of fate. To those closer to the truth, it was the beginning of a dangerous cover-up. The carefully crafted cover story began to unravel sooner than the groom or his family anticipated. At first, the narrative of a sudden illness seemed believable, and many accepted it without question. But among the hotel staff, quiet unease lingered. A housekeeper whispered to a colleague about the marks she had seen on the bride's skin, details that did not fit with the explanation of natural causes. A doctor privately confided to a friend that the injuries were inconsistent with a collapse. These small cracks in the official version spread like wildfire once a staff member leaked the information to a local journalist. The first article appeared discreetly, hinting at unanswered questions surrounding the bride's death. Within days, larger outlets picked up the story, framing it as a possible scandal hidden behind wealth and power. The groom's family worked tirelessly to suppress the coverage, but the tide was shifting. International media outlets began probing, fascinated by the contrast between the glamorous wedding and the tragic outcome. Headlines painted a picture of obsession, secrecy, and the dark cost of pride. Investigators reopened the case, this time with more independence and less interference. Evidence began to surface. The private investigators' files, containing screenshots of the bride's old dating profiles, records showing the groom's repeated inquiries into her past, testimonies from hotel employees who had noticed the tension that night. What had once been rumor was transforming into undeniable proof. The groom's image as a respected businessman quickly deteriorated. Associates distanced themselves, and his name became tied not to success, but to violence. The bride's past, which she had believed forgotten, was laid bare in court documents and news reports. The truth was no longer a secret whispered in corners. It was exposed for the world to see, and the illusion of perfection was shattered forever. The trial drew intense attention from across the country and beyond. For many, it was the first time they had seen the private affairs of the wealthy placed under such scrutiny. Cameras lined the courthouse steps, reporters dissected every detail, and the public followed the proceedings with a mixture of shock and fascination. Inside the courtroom, the groom sat expressionless, his once commanding presence reduced to a shadow of the man who had been celebrated only weeks earlier. The evidence was damning: digital records, the investigators' reports, testimonies from staff, and forensic findings that contradicted his claims of a natural death. Each revelation chipped away at the carefully built facade of innocence. The bride's family, devastated and humiliated, pressed for justice. Her story, once hidden behind wealth and social standing, became a cautionary tale about the dangers of secrecy and pride. The courtroom heard of her online activity, the groom's obsession with reputation, and the violent confrontation that ended her life. Every detail exposed the fragile line between luxury and tragedy. The verdict was clear: guilty of murder. The sentence was life imprisonment, a punishment that stripped him not only of freedom, but also of the empire he had worked so hard to protect. His fortune, though vast, could not shield him from accountability. Former allies turned away, and the same media that once praised his wedding now chronicled his downfall. The aftermath extended far beyond the prison walls. The story forced conversations about control, image, and the hidden costs of preserving honor at any price. What had begun as a dazzling celebration of wealth ended as a grim reminder that no amount of influence can bury the truth forever. The fairy tale was gone, leaving only a haunting legacy of pride, secrecy, and destruction.